right. Here we all are. What have I done? So, we're going to begin here. So, we'll begin with prayer, although a couple of notes before we pray again. First, many of you have inquired about the possibility of this presentation being recorded. And we kind of debated about it all day, and we did decide that, yes, we will record it. So just so you know, you're being recorded. However, you should know, too, and this is true of any talk, frankly, but just as a disclaimer in general, the only one on film is me. Okay, so none of you, we know that you're here, but you're here in spirit as far as the film is concerned, right? So I'm the only one that is seen. And if anybody asks any questions, I tend to repeat them, and you are not often picked up anyway by the microphone. So anyway, so the recording is happening, but it's just about me, frankly. So we'll put that up on the web as soon as we can. It takes us a while to format those things and get them up on the website, so that'll be coming. The talk that I gave on Pope Francis a month ago, back on the 21st of January, is up as of last night. It took us a while to get that one done, but that is up. Many people really like that and want to look at it again, so you can view that. And then also, I'll say a bit in a second here about my notes, but does everybody have a handout for right now? Just a one-page one? Okay, good. So then, with that disclaimer about recording, why don't we stand for the gospel? The apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. People saw them leaving, and many came to know about it. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before them. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. Father, we thank you for the gift of this night and for the chance to be here, to listen to your gospel and to delve into the truth about ourselves as men and women made in your image and likeness. Grace this evening with your Holy Spirit and the power of your truth in our hearts. We entrust our conversation this evening to the prayers of the Blessed Mother as we say together, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you. So I'm giving this talk with the hope, as best I can, that I can be Christ in this passage and do what he does in this short little snippet from Mark's Gospel. He does something really beautiful here. He's moved because the crowd was lost about the truth, and he is moved because he loves them, and precisely because he loves them, he proceeds to teach them many things. So that's sort of my introduction, I guess you could say, to what's going on with this presentation tonight. I've had some experience, not a lot, but some, ministering to people with same-sex attraction. But it's not a major area of my ministry. I don't spend a lot of time on it. I've just had some encounters with them. However, it's true, I think, and the numbers here bear this out, we're all touched by the issue, either as a topic that's personal to us, or because it affects our families, or because it affects our friends, or because we're all caught, frankly, in the cultural debate on this topic that's been raging now for quite some time, but in the last couple of years has taken on an especially decisive turn in our country. So we're here because it matters, right? So I'm speaking because I feel like our Lord in this passage, I feel like I kind of disembark here, and I kind of look up and I realize that there are the vast crowds who are, I will just say it, confused about the topic. And so I want to speak to it as best I possibly can, hopefully with love in my heart for all of you and for all those impacted by it. So that is the intro, right? A couple things in the beginning. First of all, if you have any cell phones on you, shut them off now. Secondly, your handout is pretty thin for one of my presentations, okay? And the reason for that is because I began to realize that there's a lot to talk about. And so this will get you through my talk. At the end of the talk, what's going to happen is that I'm going to put, or I should say Katie's going to put out on a back table a couple of things. She's going to put out the resources that are on the back here, one copy of each, not for you to take because they're mine, but you can look at them and say, well, there's the cover, you know. So when you find it on Amazon, you can see what it looks like that, right? And then she's also going to put out a stack of 150 of my notes. This is 16 pages, okay? So you can take the whole thing with you tonight and just have all of it. It's just easier than making a handout because I didn't know what to leave out, okay? That's only 150, though. There's more than that here. So what I would probably suggest is that you look online because it's already posted as of an hour ago on the website, okay, in the same form with a little disclaimer on that one that says that if you're going to look at the notes, you should really watch the video too because having them apart from each other doesn't do justice, okay, to what is said. So you all have the benefit of being here. I hope it's a benefit of you being here to go along with this. Anybody else not here tonight, if they're given these things electronically, if they're mailed around the world, which I'm sure they will be by the end of the week, so what happens, they should watch the video too. So that's on the website, copy this, okay? The resources, I'll just go over this really quick with you, and we're going to get to the quotes about a third of the way in, okay? But on the back, Dr. J. Budiszewski has written a lovely book on the topic. It's really not on homosexuality per se, but it's on sexuality and the meaning of sex. Very good book, not too hard to read, not too long. The CMA, there's a little pamphlet we're going to put back there, which you can take a look at. You can order those from them. That one raises a couple of questions that might be a little thorny, but it's a good resource. Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the CDF, that's online. You might find that helpful. Michael Hannon just came out with an article in First Things magazine, March of 2014, so we are current here, called Against Heterosexuality. He did spell that right, Against Heterosexuality, which is extraordinarily interesting on this topic, actually. Father John Harvey is a person that you will want to get to know if you want to learn more about this topic. He is the founder, he's a priest who founded Courage, which I'll say more about later on in the evening. And I have two of his books back there, and two of them referenced here. The two asterisks indicate that that's a very, very helpful resource to have. I would highly recommend that first book. It's Q&A, it's really easy to follow, and I think you would find it quite helpful. Jeffrey Keefe, this is on the Courage website. Someone didn't listen to me about phones. So that's on the Courage website, and there's a copy of it back there. Pew Research, I did an interesting thing back in June. They surveyed LGBT Americans, different attitudes. So if you go to their website, there's a bunch of stuff actually up there. Now there's more they've added since then, but this is the main one that I reference. And then the last one I also would highly recommend. It's a little more theological, but it's pretty easy to read. And the USCCB put it out. It's called Ministry to Persons with a Homosexual Inclination. It came out in 2006. And again, very, very good on the topic. Okay, so that's just a word on the sources. So again, when you leave, there'll be a table back there with these things to look at so you kind of see. You can hold them in your hands and smell them and, you know, whatever you want to do with these things. But please don't take them because I need them. Okay? All right. Some disclaimers. First of all, I am not an expert on the topic. Okay, I've done some praying and thinking about it, obviously, but I am not what you call a clinical or theological expert on it. I'm your local version of it, whether you like that or not, okay? So just know that. Two, I need to state that I do not speak for the organization Courage in any capacity, officially or unofficially, okay? And Courage, I'll say more at the end, but to tell you right now, it is an apostolate of the Catholic Church that reaches out to people with same-sex attraction to try and help them deal with that aspect of their lives. And it is the only recognized apostle of the Catholic Church that ministers to people with that particular tendency. But I cannot speak for them as a spokesperson, and they are clear that they want nobody to speak in their name without the permission, which I don't have, so I tell you right now, I do not represent them tonight in any capacity. That's actually a legal question at this point, as you might imagine. You should know that I am still undergoing my own process of conversion about the topic, simply because the more that I prayed about it and read about it and visited with these people who deal with this, the more I kind of realized how hard my heart really happens to be in so many ways to their situation. And I think that if we're all, well, I should say many of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we'll realize that we're in the same boat. So I'm still walking a journey, as I think many of you probably are too. So I want you to know that because I don't stand here with all the answers about my own heart. Okay? I can stand here with the truth of the church, which is powerful, and the truth about our human nature, but my heart continues to need conversion. And if you look at the bishop's documents, they will say that if anybody is going to undertake any kind of ministry to people who deal with this or speak on the topic, they must examine their hearts. We must examine our hearts and root out in it all the prejudices and sins that exist therein. So my heart is no different than anybody else's. It is fallen and it is hard. You should know that too. Last disclaimer, and then two requests, other than the phone thing. Last disclaimer, this topic is way too big for an hour and a half. It is way too big. So I'm just going to take a stab at it, okay? And the problem with that is that many of you are going to walk away, I'll just say it, rather unsatisfied at what I have to say. There is so much misinformation about this in the culture, in the church, in families, that you have to do so much cutting through and so much building a base to even get to the beginning of the argument. It's very, very difficult to explain to modern minds that have gotten so twisted around on the notion of our human nature. So I'll try, okay? So I'm leaving a lot out. So you really are going to have to read on your own. So hence the source sheet, okay? So I'll try and give you some things just to think about, basically. I hope you walk out of here with something else to consider that you hadn't thought about before. I suspect you'll probably walk out of here unsettled on some level, because all of us will find this challenging. I'm just predicting, but I think that's what's going to happen. So leave now if you want to. This is your chance. And my only requests are two. One, please listen with an open mind and not your emotions, which is hard for us to do, especially on a topic that's so very personal. But I would really recommend it. It's a very, it's a logical argument, right? And so our reason has to kind of be in charge here as best as possible. And the thing about it is it's very sequential. It's A, then B, then C, then D, and E. And if you're lost on A, you don't get the rest of it. Okay, so you really kind of have to try and do this. That's request number one. Request number two, which is unusual for my talks. Usually I don't do this, but if you could do it tonight, please save your questions to the end. I'd really like you to kind of hear the whole thing first before we go back and do any kind of clarifying, okay? And I will try and get done, it's already 7:15, by 8:30, but it's going to go, I think, a little longer than that. So we'll take a break so you can stand up and return to your senses for a minute before you sit back down. So, we okay on the ground rules? All right, good. Thank you. Talk's going to go kind of like this as an outline. It's in three parts. First part, explaining the meaning of sex. And so that will encompass a few things. Explain that sex and sexual differences between men and women have defined unchangeable meanings and purposes, or an end to them. It's called a telos. Teleology, the end of things. And that's so that we can establish what is normative, that there's a normal when it comes to sex and sexuality. And I'll try and explain that this is a truth that is prior to religion. This is about natural law. Okay, so we're actually going to be doing very little talking about religion tonight, because you don't actually have to. That's the great cultural trap of this argument already. It's really not about religion at all. Well, no, that's not true. It's about religion later on. In the beginning, it is not. And then, so therefore, that should get us to the point where we realize that the meaning of our sexuality dictates some things about sexuality that are not arbitrary. Ethics is not arbitrary. It's based on something. That's part one, I hope. Part two, I hope, will go like this. We want to sharpen our language and understanding of same-sex attraction, because we're very imprecise in the way we talk about it, and it causes lots of problems. So in the culture, one of the biggest problems with the discourse is that our terms are very, very poor. And if we're going to get this, we've got to sharpen our vocabulary. So precision, a little word on some of the causes for SSA, same-sex attraction, and we're going to conclude that same-sex attraction is a distortion of the normal pattern of the natural world, I hope. And then part 3, which I think might be the part all of you are a little more interested in, freedom of choice in light of what our sexuality means. So we all have to respond to our sexuality, every one of us, okay, as persons and as a culture. So how do we do that? That's going to be kind of the end of it, okay? I didn't want to start where I am going to because what happens is that already we begin to close off our minds to the truth of this because it sounds like the classic old Catholic argument, which we've heard blah, 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 has already been discredited by the New York Times and all the enlightened people of the world. But the thing of it is that we got to start at the beginning. There's just no choice, okay? So bear with me. So part 1, the purpose of sex. Before we can talk about how to understand and love and support our brothers and sisters, and that is what they are, no question, who deal with same-sex attraction, we got to go back a few steps and discuss our bodily nature and our sexuality in general. And we have to do it without being afraid of the conclusions. Okay? So here I'm going to borrow heavily from Dr. Budashevsky and other natural law scholars. So that's that first book, I think, on your handouts. All right? So the first thing is that observations about our bodies, they lead us to deduce meaning. They lead us to figure things out about ourselves. So when we say that bodily organs and systems have a purpose, we're assigning an end to them, which means we're giving a meaning to them. And that already puts us a little bit into the realm of philosophy. We're talking about meanings. But this is scientific, too, in its nature. So there's a normative that begins to emerge when we talk about our body. So, for example, think about bodily systems. We have a respiratory system. We have a digestive system. We have a circulatory system. Okay? So the fact that we've even said that much means that we have done something interesting that animals can't do. We've stepped back, looked at ourselves, noticed a pattern, figured out there's a meaning to it, and therefore I've concluded that there are things that you can and can't do to preserve it as a system. My digestive system, it consists of my mouth and my teeth and my salivary glands and my esophagus and my stomach, and everything that goes from my stomach out of me. I don't know what all this stuff is, but it works in my case. So there you have it, right? So we understand that's a digestive system. So just by saying that means I've assigned a meaning or a purpose and a normative. Normative means it has a legal kind of binding quality to it, to the system. Now, that a science can show me that. I can observe that as a property, that food passes through me and it nourishes me. So what's the purpose of it? It's to consume resources to keep myself alive. That's it. So the purpose is life, isn't it? So I know that about watching my body in action. Okay, so stamped into our nature is a meaning and is a purpose. So that means that I can know what my body is for and what parts of me are for just by observing them. Which means if I choose to do something with my body that goes against its end, it's for, I'm behaving in an unnatural or a disordered way. So for example, it is natural, it's in its nature, it's in its purpose, it's for its end to use my mouth to eat. It is not natural to use my mouth to shovel snow. Okay? I can. You're laughing already. I can do that, but it will have some messy results. Now, why is that? Because we're going against its end. We're going against its purpose. So I can say to my brain, purpose is this. Therefore, while I may want to shovel snow with my teeth, I'm not going to do that because it will ruin what it's for. That's an easy example. It is pleasurable for me to eat chocolate. Okay? However, if I consume pounds and pounds of it in a sitting, that goes against the end of my digestive system and the rest of my body because that's not good for me. So my reason has to step in and say, wait a minute, don't do that. Okay, you're going against the end. You're misusing it. If I consume chocolate-covered roofing nails, it tastes great for a second. Okay? But I'm ruining my digestive system because it's not meant for that. You following this? So our bodies show us what our systems are for. And we don't just make that up. That's not a religious argument. That is purely a biological fact of existence. So if we want to live, we eat. If we want to live well, we don't eat nails, even in chocolate. Good as that might be for a second. Okay, so we don't do that. So, translate that. We can observe the truth of sexual difference, male and female, and from it the meaning of sex in the same way. So by sex, we're talking about both differences between male and female, men and women, as well as sexual intercourse, the sexual act, the marital act. So those are both kind of interchangeable here for this part of the talk. So look at the created world. Look at the universe around us. Look at the planet. Again, just play scientist for a second, without being a philosopher or a theologian, and you realize that there is male and female through almost all of creation. Okay? So there are some parts of the animal world that doesn't quite apply to, but in general, things are male and female. They are created that way. So we can see there's sexual difference. The next question becomes, why? Why is that? Just like I could see that I got a mouth and I got an esophagus and I got a stomach, I have to ask, well, why? Well, because I need to eat to live. We got the purpose, right? We did that already. So look at men and women. You know, emotionally and intellectually, men and women process reality differently. We do. We engage relationships differently. We visualize things differently. Okay, so already in that realm of the emotional, intellectual, spiritual, we are different creatures, male and female. But the most obvious one is biologically. Okay, I can look at my body and look at a female's body and realize that they are different creatures. Okay, and so the most obvious signs or difference are the organs for reproduction and childbearing. That's where the most blatant differences show up to even the most casual of observers. So if I call my sexual organs my reproductive system, that's me making a claim about why I have them, what they're for. I have them for the purposes of reproduction. So even the scientific title has already explained to us what it's for, right? Actually, strictly speaking, and people get thrown when I say this, so hang on, I actually only have half a reproductive system. I'm a male. By myself, I can't make anything come to life, okay? Women, same thing. I have my own circulatory system, my own digestive system, my own every other system, but the one system I only have half of is a reproductive system. That's a fascinating thing to think about, don't you think? So again, we can ask the question, why? We can observe our bodies and ask the question, why do I only have half a reproductive system? Because someone else has the other half. Because what must happen? I must join with them to do something. In fact, I must join with them to make new life. Not possible by myself. Okay, so that's interesting. So what we've arrived at here is what's called the complementary, as in they complete each other, differences of the sexes by nature. By biological nature, they are complementary. So therefore, even a rough inspection of my body and a woman's body lead me to the conclusion that they fit together. They are supposed to go together. Their parts fit. That's the only way that I can plainly put it to all of you, right? So men and women are two halves of a whole. They're meant to come together so they can become something greater than they would be merely by themselves. Okay? And we do pretty good by ourselves, I think, but together we are something far deeper. That's what marriage is all about. So our complementary nature allows us to reproduce. So we know that men and women can come together in the sexual act, and the timing is right, new life comes about. That's how our species is supposed to continue. That's the purpose of a reproductive system, my half, and women, your half. It is to make new life so we can continue on as a race, as a species. Okay? So, we've arrived now at one of the two purposes or ends of sex. It's for procreation. In a word, babies. Okay? It is for babies. My half, your half, all of the different complements, it's for babies. It's for making new life. So one purpose of sex is the preservation of the human race. Now, that's one. The other purpose, the other end, the other meaning, the other point is for uniting a husband and a wife. It's for bonding. Babies, bonding. Easy to remember that, right? Babies and bonding, okay? Janet Smith talks about like that. That's kind of her language I'm borrowing. Now, because it's for babies, it's therefore for bonding, for uniting a husband and a wife. So if we think about it carefully, we'll see those two things cannot ever be separated without messing the entire thing up. those two ends, babies and bonding, must go together. So here's why. Unlike any other creature on this planet, it takes humans by far the longest time frame to raise a new human to maturity. So think about, insects, right? It's probably like, a matter of hours, I suppose, before, new insects become adult insects. In the fish world, I don't fish, so I don't know these things, but it takes, maybe like a year, perhaps, right, to, make new mature fish. Deer and dogs and things, maybe a couple of years, right? So after a couple of years, they have reproduced, they have grown up, there's a new adult, mature dog, deer, whatever. Insert a zoo creature here. For humans, how long does it take? This is a great question. How long does it take to raise a mature human being? Some of us never. That's it, You can pick 18 years. You can pick 35 these days. I'm pushing on 55, perhaps, for some people that I know in my family. Okay, so it takes a really long time. And even then, parents, you're not done being parents, are you? I mean, as grandparents, you're still helping raise your kids, have their own babies, right? So the human organism is so socially complex that it takes forever to raise a new one. So because that's true, that means that a new baby, a new human life, a new human species requires a stable mom and a dad and a union for a really, really long time if they're going to turn out like they're supposed to. Okay? Which is why sex is for bonding. You bond with each other, husbands and wives, for the sake of your kids. Because you've got to stay together to raise them, or it doesn't work. Right? So that's the point. So now you can see why sex belongs in marriage. It's easy how we come to that conclusion so quickly in this whole discussion, right? And we can see how or why the proper mastery of our sexual desires is a lifelong and difficult task, because if we don't master our desires, we're going to misuse them and bring harm to ourselves and to other people, because the bonding is going to come apart. Okay? So babies and bonding, it's got to go together here. Right? Precisely because it's for babies, it is for bonding, to raise the baby to what it needs to be, and to how would I put it, to mature the adults along the way in the process. That's a little more modern thing we've added on to, but it is an accurate meaning for sexuality. So two purposes. Babies, bonding. So I have just arrived, without even mentioning God, at the purpose of my sexuality and of my body. Babies, bonding. Notice one thing I left out. Because if you ask many people today, especially young people, what is sex for? The first thing they're going to say is actually pleasure. It's for that, right? Now, that's good, but it's not a defining purpose of sexual intercourse because it's not unique to it, okay? So it's pleasurable to eat, to breathe, to urinate, to exercise as well for other people, not myself, okay? So that tells me that pleasure alone is not enough of a meaning to figure out whether I should or shouldn't do something. More is required. Its deeper meaning must be adhered to, otherwise we'll overdo a pleasurable activity or bring harm to ourselves in the process. It is pleasurable to sniff paint for a while, okay? But I don't do it because the deeper meaning of it makes me know that doing so is harmful to me, so I choose to forgo the pleasure of it. My reason intervenes and says, don't do that. So pleasure by itself is not good enough for a reason. If it gets in the way and becomes the reason, we mess everything else up. Okay? So it's there, it's in the equation for a reason, but it's not enough. It's not enough. So sex, two purposes, babies, bonding, can't separate them. Further points on why the two purposes of sex can never be pulled apart from each other. If I try to have bonding without babies, so one end and not the other one, I'm trying to take one end out, bonding without babies, and I will just say that sterilization and contraception, that's what that is, bonding without babies, then I am not really bonding because I'm using my partner and reducing sex to mere pleasure. So I've trumped one reason at the expense of the other two, and I'm unraveling things. Okay? And really I'm not actually bonding then either, because I'm putting a barrier between me and my spouse. And I'm closing myself off to the fact that what I'm doing right now could result in a life. And if I do that, then I'm relieving myself of the reality that I am with this person with me forever. Forever. And if I do that, I don't have to train myself to treat them as well as possible because it could come apart. Okay? So the whole babies bonding thing, they can't be separated. So bonding without babies is not really bonding at all. In fact, there's neither bonding nor babies in that situation. Okay? And after hearing confessions long enough now and dealing with married couples, I will just tell all of you, and this is why you're all going to leave here mad at me, contraception really does ruin marriages. It really does. Okay? It is insidious. It's a cancer. It's very, very difficult. Okay? We'll get to why in a second. I also open myself to sexual behavior outside of marriage. If I sterilize myself or my spouses, I can sleep with whoever I want to because there's no responsibility for an offspring. No union there then. Okay? The possibility of bonding with each act of intercourse forces me to take my marriage vows very seriously, and I must cultivate virtue. This is the hard part, okay? If I'm going to have babies and bond together, then I must treat my spouse so carefully because it's really easy to misuse their sexuality. It's a weapon in many marriages. It's a weapon. And if I treat it that way, we're all in trouble. So, if I know that babies and bonding are always a possibility, it forces me to take the difficult, hard route of not using my sexuality as a weapon against my spouse. No one likes sex. It's the hard pathway, but that's it. Okay? So contraception lets me skip all that. Skip it all. If, other end of the spectrum, I try and have babies without bonding, kids without sex, then I'm manufacturing life through artificial means, which means I have a baby which is not my own, which means I'm not really bonding either. So there is the problem with in vitro fertilization and artificial insemination and sperm donation and surrogate motherhood and every manufactured child-rearing thing we created in our Huxleyan Brave New World trajectory that we're on here. You can't do that either. Okay, so that's not going to work, right? So again, this is not a religious argument. I am purely observing what's true about my body. And I'm saying, because we all agreed on this, at least I think we did, that if it has an end, babies and bonding, then I can't go against it. And then I'm sniffing paint. Contraception is sniffing paint. In vitro fertilization is sniffing paint, chocolate-covered nails. I'm misusing a system that nature has shown me what it's for. And we know that that has messy results. So we've now arrived, anyway, in theory, we have arrived, at the meaning and purpose of sexual difference and the sexual act. So if sex is for babies and for bonding, then there are certain actions that are never allowed, and I have to choose accordingly with my reason. So if I say, legally, morally, personally, that there's nothing wrong with contraception or divorce or adultery because I have decided sex is not about babies and bonding together, then I've lost almost all my ability to argue against homosexual activity. That doesn't follow anymore. If contraception is fine, then on some level so is same-sex relationships. They go hand in hand. Okay? And again, it's all about what our natural ends are as people. If you separate these two things out, you can't argue anything else. When the Supreme Court legally began to say that we had a private right to contraception, they lost the argument 60 years later. We're losing it now, but they began losing it a long time ago. They severed the essential link. They didn't see it. Okay, the church did. Okay, but that's what's happening. So, if I engage in acts outside my promised committed marriage between a man and a woman, I'm going against the created nature of my body. Therefore, I can't go against things that are against the meaning of sex and expect to be fulfilled as a person. I will not be fulfilled if I go against what my body dictates is required of me. I'll not be fulfilled, right? So because the baby's bonding thing is so important, humans figured out that they needed marriage. They had to invent, if you will, although they didn't exactly invent it because it comes from God on some level, vows and commitments. That's where marriage comes into the picture because the bonding thing is so important, because it's so lifelong, because it's so much work. Love enters the picture. Marriage enters the picture. A covenant enters the picture and intervenes and pulls it all together. Okay? Because my own biology teaches me the meaning, but it's difficult to live it out without my reason saying I need a vow. This makes sense. So up to this point, I've not even mentioned Christianity, because it's not necessary. It is not necessary. The teachings of the gospel are helpful. They show us our nature. We often forget about them. Okay, but you can get to this point without even appealing to the gospel or to the commandments. Right? So what is the purpose of sex? Again, the norm of the created world is for men and women to enter into lifelong union in order to create and raise new life, the continuation of the species, and the sexual differences between men and women exist to accomplish those ends. It is for babies and bonding together. In deviation from the norm or the end only brings harm. That is as elementary as I can possibly spell this out. Okay? Look, one more piece about marriage and love. It follows from all that the definition and purpose of marriage is determined by meaning and the purpose of sex. The meaning of marriage comes from the meaning of sex. One follows the other. So it follows that if love is authentic, then it must be directed in a way that is true so that our nature of our bodies is respected. If love goes against the nature of my body, it's not love, it's a distortion of it, it's something else. Okay? So it's not accurate, for example, to say that I had sex with someone I was not married to because I claimed to love them. That's not accurate. Love must follow our nature. So if our nature is babies and bonding, why would I want bonding without babies and call that love? It's not love. That's lust. That's me using somebody because I'm making pleasure the highest meaning of the act, not babies, not bonding. Okay? I can trick myself into thinking it's love, but that's not what it is. That's a distortion of it. Okay? So I engaged in an action that denied the essential link between babies and bonding, so I'm lust in that case. Think about this. In life, there are all these relationships, right? Brothers and sisters love each other. Mothers love their sons. Friends love each other. Fishing buddies love each other. In none of those situations do they have sex, because they realize sex does not improve those relationships, it actually destroys it. So love happens all the time, but sex is reserved for one kind of relationship only that exists within the vow to say that I belong to you completely. Because that's what sex is. Sex is a language to it. Okay, my body says something whether I realize it or not. So if I walk into somebody and I shake their hand and I smile at them and I lie while I'm doing it, I'm saying one thing with my body, I'm honest. My mind, I'm saying something else. If I engage in sexual intercourse with somebody else, what I'm saying with my body, the language of my nature, is that I love you for eternity, I will have children with you, I'll raise them with you, and we are bonded together. That's what that action says. I can tell myself all that I want, it doesn't mean anything, but my body's already shown me the opposite. Yes, it does. And the best science would tell you that all the bonding properties of intercourse fly in the face of a hookup culture. Doesn't work. We can't handle that kind of intimacy because it's for one person only. That kind of exclusivity is for one person only. Okay, so the meaning of marriage follows from the meaning of sex. And I can call it whatever I want to if I deviate from that, but it's not love and it's not marriage. Okay? Brothers and sisters don't have sex. Mothers and sons don't have sex. Fishing buddies don't have sex. At least they're not supposed to. Okay? Because we realize that is unnatural. It goes against my nature. Babies, bonding. Okay? So it doesn't follow then that two men can love each other as they claim and engage in sexual acts. Doesn't follow. Doesn't follow. So if two men or two women want to produce a child, they can't. That tells us something about their relationship. It's unnatural. There's no babies, and therefore there's no bonding. One requires the other. We have already decided that because of our bodily systems, right? So we're talking about lust, not love. That's what it is. So two men cannot get married. Two women cannot get married. Two women and two men are not complementary unions. Their parts do not fit together that way, and we can see that biologically, scientifically. They can have a friendship, but it can't be a sexual union because there's no babies and bonding. Okay? So To put it very plainly, same-sex acts are chocolate-covered roofing nails and sniffing paint. They go against our nature. That's the end of part one. So we have to agree on that before you can go on to the next part of this, okay? And you can already see why what I just got done saying is so shocking for so many people, because we have gone so far afield from our nature, okay? This is what the 1960s have done to us. It's a wreck. It's a wreck, okay? So that's very hard, okay? And it's a lot to take in. And I think that what's going to have to happen is that we all have to go and pray about this for a long time, okay? As we realize the truth of what we have done to ourselves in the last 50, 60 years as a country and as a culture. So that already is a lot to take without what's coming next, okay? So part two. We need to sharpen our language around same-sex attraction. So I did a little recap, okay, on the ground rules. If we accept that sex and marriage have a defined meaning and a purpose, then we're in a better position to speak more accurately about the homosexual condition. You can't talk about same-sex attraction until you first get the norm. That's why I started with this long discourse on natural law. Hard as it was to hear, painful, upsetting, you're mad at me now, I can tell, but we got to get that if we can get to the second part, okay? And you can be mad if you want to, but it's your nature, and it's mine too. And like my justice system, you can argue if you want to. I can argue, but I can't deny what my body tells me. It doesn't work. So if all that is true, and it is, if our nature is what it is, if we have two ends of our sexual differences, babies and bonding, and we know that we can't pull them apart because of what I just said, then homosexuality is a distortion of the ordinary, normal sexual inclinations of the human species. And that says nothing about them as persons, okay? Bracket that. From a purely biological, natural ends perspective, it's a distortion of the ordinary, normal sexual inclination of the human species. If we were pure Darwinians here, which I'm glad that we're not, then we understand that people with SSA, same-sex attraction, they're out of sync with the natural, or they can't reproduce. They won't be around long. Okay, that they would get evolutioned out of the system, right? If we're pure Darwinians, we'd realize that instantly. Okay? So it is disordered from the purposes or ends, so it's out of the ends, out of sync with sexual difference in the sexual act, because same-sex unions can never result in babies. It denies the complementary and differences of the heart of sexual contact, and therefore can never be for bonding either, because we've seen that the ends can't be separated from each other or from complementarity, okay? By the way, this is not the same thing as a couple, heterosexual couple, married couple, who one of whom is sterile and can't have kids. That's a different argument, because they are still complementary as people. And if you ask those couples, their intention is to have babies and bonding. They are being prevented by something outside their power from doing so. That's not their choice. Contraception is a choice. I'm intending against nature. In their case, they're dealing with a burden that nature has placed on them. There's a fundamental distinction. You need to remember that for later on. So with that as a background, language sharpening tip number 1 on the whole question. Homosexuality is not the opposite of heterosexuality. Homosexuality is not the opposite of heterosexuality. So therefore, the first shift in language is away from the idea that homosexuality are somewhat equally valid sexual orientations. It's not true. It's more accurate to say that homosexuality is distorted heterosexuality. It's distorted from the right end of nature. So we try and equalize them in our current cultural context because it's become about rights and everything else. But the fact is, there's heterosexuality and then there's a distortion of it. There's the normal ordered world what our bodies teach us is true, and there's a distortion on it. Okay? And frankly, and this is where that First Things article that I have in here from Hannon is pretty good, heterosexual and homosexual are modern and poor terms anyway, where they're new inventions in dialogue. It is actions more than orientations that define who we are as persons. So I don't even like the term heterosexual. It doesn't really, frankly, make any sense. But for our conversation tonight, it will work, okay? So the first distinction is homosexuality is not opposite of heterosexuality. They're not equally valid categories. One is a distortion on the other, okay? Second thing, we should avoid calling people homosexuals by category. If you say so-and-so is a homosexual, so-and-so is gay, we are categorizing people. We can never do that. That is so wrong to those people, okay? And here's the part where I hope you begin to realize that, all the legalistic way I'm presenting this, it looks fine on paper, but what it comes down to is these are persons. They're not a condition, they're a person, okay? You don't walk into the cancer ward and say, all the cancers are here, okay? All the deaf are there, although there's a little distinction there, okay? You don't call a person by a disease. You call them Fred or Susan because they're a person. So it is distasteful to hear people talk about homosexual as a category or gay as a category because it denies their unique value as individual persons created by God. That's wrong. And we do it all the time. Okay? So what the church prefers is this. We want to speak about same-sex attraction because it's more of a condition and not a category. Okay? So SSA is a term that allows us to recognize as a person with a condition who is unique. And it helps us realize something important about SSA, okay, which the culture also always gets wrong. SSA comes in varying degrees. There are different degrees of same-sex attraction. It's not like there's just one homosexual inclination and that's it, okay? Some with SSA are married and have kids. And they struggle in their marriages, but they are married, some with SSA. Others have it so extremely that they cannot handle any kind of heterosexual contact whatsoever, okay? Some are just very strongly drawn to members of the same sex. That's the other end of the spectrum of SSA. SSA can change over time. It shifts in life. There's some times when it's stronger than others. It's not uncommon for people in adolescence to experience, just because of the natural development of their bodies, some type of SSA. And in these days and age, it freaks them out because they think that they're permanently gay. Church says, no. That might be gone in a year. I mean, lots of things can happen. It shifts and changes all the time. And our language about it denies it. Our language, we speak about it like it's this unchangeable, immutable thing. Oh, I'm gay and that's it. It's done. No. That's not true. So, speaking about same-sex attraction rather than orientation, rather than homosexual, rather than gay, is a much better way to think about what's actually going on in this person's life and in his or her heart. That's very important that we understand that, okay? Orientation is a bad term. It's a bad term. It's a mistake to emphasize so heavily sexual orientation as a defining category. The fundamental defining orientation of every single person is toward Christ. Period. That's it. And that's not impacted by distortions in sexual attraction or whether I'm blind or have cancer or whatever. My orientation is always to Christ. That's the only orientation that matters. Everything else is a distortion on what is true. So we have to be careful about that. And again, like I said before, if you call orientation as a category, it makes it seem so static, like it's there forever. But that's not really the reality if you talk to people who deal with this, who are honest about it anyway. So therefore, okay, people who suffer with SSA are no less children of God than anybody else. We recognize in them the face of Jesus Christ. That is a fact of our existence. Every single person on this planet is a face of our Lord. In fact, I would say it's proper to speak of SSA as an emotional, mental, and physical infirmity in some way, shape, or form. It's a bit like having an illness. Okay? And because that's true, and by the way, it's not a commentary on whether it's curable or not. That's a whole other debate which the church takes no position on, by the way. That's another conversation. But if we can agree that there is some kind of infirmity about it, that it's unnatural about it, that's disordered about it, then we can say that the suffering face of Christ is especially present in them because they are our sick brothers and sisters, like in the cancer ward, like in the nursing home, Jesus Christ is so close to those who suffer with infirmities. So their face perhaps is even more his face than everybody else. And we should remember that because of what they deal with. Whether they realize it or not, that's true. Okay? So categorizing a person by sexual inclination places the emphasis in the wrong place, away from our common sonship in Christ, who is the desire of all of our hearts and the longing of all of our orientations. So do not speak of them in categories. That is, it does an injustice to them and to us. All right? So the conclusion, so the preferred language it goes like this. People who have same-sex attraction to any degree are children of God whose orientation is to Christ. Now, because it doesn't work in sound bites, the media doesn't say that. Okay? It's easy to call them gays or LGBT, but do not speak in categories. All right? This will end, I promise you. Why don't we stand up for 5 minutes and stretch? But please no questions right now. If that's okay. 5 minutes. Thank you. I want to say a brief word about some of the causes of same-sex attraction. And it's important to note that the politics in this has overcome objective science now in this area. So it's difficult to find helpful data about the causes because it's difficult to find scientists who will risk their lives to present some. But honest scientists would say that the best estimates are that people with SSA make up about maybe 3% of the population, possibly 4%. That's about it. Okay? I think because of how often we're bombarded with it as a topic in public discourse, we think it's this much, much higher number, but it's maybe 3-4%. And if we think about from the evolutionary perspective, from the biological perspective, that makes sense because you don't, in nature, you wouldn't want too high a population or you wouldn't continue on as a species. So that kind of distortion in our sexuality, that's probably about right. Okay? It's difficult to know what leads it to develop. It's very hard, actually, to find the causes. It's likely a combination of nature and nurture together. The best science, I think, would tell us that. And I think most scientists of either spectrum would agree. And many things in development are that way, right? Nature and nurture come together to make us who we are. So there's no gay gene, okay? Science has never found one, at least not one that can identify successfully. So to say that I'm born this way is a simplification of the situation, actually. That's not exactly right. There's more to it than that. Studies of identical twins, for example, have shown that in many cases, about half actually, one develops SSA, the other one does not. Okay, so if it's purely genetic, they should both do so. So obviously there's an environmental factor that plays a key role in whether a person develops SSA in his or her lifetime or they do not. There's good evidence that childhood events play a role in our psychosexual development and our self-understanding as male and female. So SSA is something like blocked heterosexuality. And I get that from Keefe, which is another one of your sources, okay? That's called The Understanding Heart. And the block is caused by a failure of a child to identify with a parental role model of the same sex, or sometimes the opposite, so that they develop or they don't develop a healthy sense of their own maleness or femaleness. Somewhere along the way in the child's development, maleness or femaleness gets distorted in their own self-perception. And it makes what you call a deficit in their character that they try to fill with ways that are out of sync with what a normal person tries to do. So wounds develop around this usually, okay? And usually it comes along with low self-image, and it causes them to begin to be attracted to what they feel they're lacking in themselves. For example, if I feel like I lack a sense of masculinity, I'm going to be drawn to the masculine disproportionately. That's how it begins to develop in people. And they're like in grade school typically when this begins to happen, okay? So curious enough, people with SSA tend to be both repulsed by and simultaneously attracted to the same sex. It's very interesting because there's such a self-loathing of their own maleness. They don't like males, and yet they're drawn to them because they're trying to make up what they're lacking in themselves. That's kind of what therapists tend to uncover when they help people who have this condition. So many with SSA cannot describe their childhood well in therapy. They don't remember it. So that tells us that they're blocking things out, and they're trying to fill a hole somehow in their adult sexual activity. And I'm generalizing here, okay, which I said we shouldn't do, but I mean, you can look at trends anyway in therapy and studies. So is it true for everybody? No. But there's enough of it's true for that you can form some generalized possible conclusions about it as a condition. Many people with SSA are usually very unstable emotionally. They tend to be oversensitive, and they tend to seek out antagonistic relationships as normal, which is why gay unions are so inherently unstable. They really tend not to last. There are exceptions to that, but in general, they don't last very long because personality-wise, the people who enter them are so used to antagonistic relationships because they create them out of their own insecurity of identity. Okay? Many of them are very angry, frankly. If you talk to them long enough and you get them talking about their life, the anger comes right out. Okay? Many self-identified lesbians had traumatic experiences with male role model early in life, and they carry a hatred of men into their adulthood. And they're trying to make up for that in their sexual encounters. Okay? So the church does not take a position on the scientific causes of SSA. We don't really claim to know why. All right? Other than to say that careful exploration is needed so that we can offer them whatever help they possibly need. That's all that we'll say about the topic. Okay, we say about the moral implications of it, but scientifically, whether you're born this way or not, we don't take a position because, frankly, it almost doesn't matter. The result is still the same. I'll get to why that is in a second, all right? I want to say something about the argument, God made me this way, which has become very common in our conversation. Now, here you can look at your handout finally. You waited all this time to use it. You're very patient. Quote A1. And this is from that USCCB document that I suggest. To the extent that homosexual tendency or inclination is not subject to one's free will, one is not morally coupled for that tendency. The church does not teach that the experience of homosexual attraction is in itself sinful. Okay? In other words, it's not an act of the will. We recognize that as a part of this, it is simply outside of a person's control. What I'm attracted to, even if it's against my nature, is out of my free choice by and large. Therefore, I'm not going to say someone is sinful for having an attraction to a person of the same sex. Not true. Second quote, A2. It's crucially important to understand that saying a person has a particular inclination that's disordered is not to say that the person as a whole is disordered. Nor does it mean that one has been rejected by God or the church. Right? If I am born without one arm, okay, which is a disorder in nature, based on the proper functioning of the continuation of the species in our bodies, that is disordered about me. I'm not disordered as a person. I have dignity, I have value, I am loved, I'm missing an arm. Okay? You don't call that normal, but you don't reject me either. Okay? But it's really kind of the same thing in so many ways. Okay? So there is same-sex attraction in the world for the same reason there are blind people who don't hear, with birth defects, cancer, bipolar tendencies, and autism, because we live in a fallen world. That's why. That's why it exists, okay? So God loves each of us with untold affection as a father, and he sends us his grace and abundance to deal with our challenges, and we all have them. We all have defects, people. I have mine, oh my goodness. You know me now, you know what they all are, okay? So same-sex attraction exists in the world so the forces of love and compassion can be unleashed to help them and reach out to walk with those who deal with it, not reject them, not make fun of them, to help them. Just like any other birth defect or whatever you want to call it. So God allows it so we can learn to love, just like any other challenging physical, mental, emotional condition that we encounter in the created fallen world. So quote A3 is from Father John Harvey's book. God does not make people homosexual. God permits it, this particular suffering, to come to his people for his own mysterious reasons. Okay? So it's theologically dangerous to say, God made me this way, because that gives rise to the false idea that if God made it, it must be good, and therefore same-sex relationships are endorsed by him. None of that follows. Okay? The line of argument denies the normative meaning of our sexuality that we already agreed on an hour ago. That there are certain purposes and ends, and that exists in nature. So if that's true, then you can't go against that, right? So, by seeing same-sex attraction as a distortion of the norm, we're able to differentiate between what God permits in his creation as opposed to what he plans in his created order. There's a planned created order for the continuation of the species, then there's what else happens, because he permits lots of things in a fallen world. Okay? So it's a very subtle distinction, but it's extremely important. Because if I argue on, well, God made me this way, then I can do whatever I want to. And that's not true. Okay? So that's the same thing as saying God made me blind, God made me autistic, whatever. Yeah, kind of, but we recognize that there's a particular cross about that a person carries because they're not in the norm. They're not norm, okay? So we don't call it normal, but we do try and help them. Big difference. That is the end of part 2. Part 3. The free choice of how to react to same-sex attraction on a personal level and a cultural level. So here we begin to differentiate between the inclination or the attraction, not sinful, and reactions we can have to which may or may not be sinful. So for every person, every single person, heterosexual and those with degrees of SSA, we reach a point early in life when we, 1, become aware of our sexual passions, and 2, decide what we're going to do about them. That happens to all of us. I become aware that I'm a sexual being, then I must decide what does that mean. And that opens up a lifetime of choices, all until I am dead. Okay? So because sexual difference and sexuality have a meaning and a purpose, which we already explained, babies and bonding, we can choose to act in a way that leads to fulfill that purpose, or we can act in ways that go against its intended purpose. Sniffing paint, for example. Pleasure, fun, goes against the purpose of my respiratory and bodily system, so I do not do it. Okay? So we can act in ordered or disordered ways. And the ordered ways are made known to us by what our body is and how it functions. A4. Of course, heterosexual persons not uncommonly have disordered sexual inclinations as well. It's not enough for a sexual inclination to be heterosexual for it to be properly ordered. For example, any tendency toward sexual pleasure that is not subordinated to the greater goods of love and marriage is disordered, in that it inclines a person toward a use of sexuality that does not accord with the divine plan for creation. There is an intrinsic disorder of what is directed toward that which is evil in all cases, contra naturam, against our nature. There's also the accidental disorder of what is not properly ordered by a right reason, what fails to attain the proper measure of virtue, contra rationem. So in other words, a heterosexual person has a desire and inclination towards the opposite sex, and he or she must spend his entire life learning how to act out those desires in a way that conforms to the purpose and meaning of sex. That's living in accord with reason. Not going contra to reason, living in accord with reason. Choosing not to eat chocolate-covered roofing nails, living in accord with my reason because my reason tells me what my nature and purpose is for. Sin arises when we misuse our passions or inclinations against reason, nature, or virtue. So if I act in a way that goes against my ends, I'm being unnatural and unreasonable and unvirtuous, and I'm bringing harm to myself and other people. So when we act on our passions in a way that goes against their nature and their purpose, so for example, masturbation is against my nature and purpose. Pornographic exposure is against my nature and purpose, especially reason. Contraception, adultery, fornication. If we do those things, then we're emptied as people. We're not fulfilled. We're not joyful because we're conflicted, because we're living against our nature. It's really very simple. Very, very simple on that level. Okay? So for the person with same-sex attraction, there's the same freedom to choose how to act on one's desires, although the major difference that it's impossible for them to act out on their attraction without running contrary to nature. A heterosexual married couple can act out on their desire in accord with nature, provided that their reason teaches them how to live virtuously. I'm not going to use my wife. I'm not going to be lustful. I'm not going to contracept. I'm going to practice natural family planning instead and learn the virtue of chastity and self-mastery. That's my reason and my nature working together to act out on my natural human desires. a same-sex person has the unfortunate burden of never being able to act out because it's always against their nature. So heterosexuals and homosexuals, to use that as a category just for a second, have similar but not exactly the same problems to deal with. For heterosexuals, it's much more about reason and a little bit less about nature. For those with SSA, it's always about nature. So it's always wrong in their case. In my case, it can be wrong, depending upon how I choose to do it. You see the distinction? So that's why the burden for people with SSA is so crushing. They can't ever act out on the desire because it's like sniffing paint. Can't do it. Okay? So there's a distinction between the attraction, not sinful, and the action, always sinful. Always. We can, soften the culpability a little bit when you talk about compulsion and addiction and all that stuff. That gets in there, but in the end, it's still a choice. Okay. So if all that's true, and it is, what is a person with same-sex attraction to do? I mean, here we arrive at the real cultural problem, right? What are we supposed to do? So here, if you look at the bottom of your sheet, I've laid out, if you will, 3 options. A person with SSA faces a very similar set of choices or options as everybody else once one discovers their sexuality. They can live, option number 1, live in denial, fighting against it, being afraid of it, being ashamed of it, loathing the self for it. That's one reaction, very common one, frankly. Second option, act out on it by embracing an actively gay lifestyle. Option 3, coming to terms with the truth of it by accepting the challenge of managing it within the limits of what our nature allows, that is, living chastely in their case, and directing our passion energies outward for the good of others and not my own selfish gain. That's pretty much those are the options, okay? Now, for a heterosexual, the third option is similar. It's similar. The desires can be acted upon, but only if a person is willing to accept the challenge of acting on them appropriately. That, too, requires the discipline of chastity. Everybody must cultivate chastity, not just people with SSA. Okay, married couples, if you don't practice chastity, your spouse will get ticked at you. Bottom line. Okay, because you just use each other. It's easy to do. Okay? I mean, you're all practicing it right now, from what I could tell, right? So we get this as a concept, right? So it's not appropriate to commit adultery. It's not appropriate to masturbate or to fornicate or to contracept or to sterilize a fertile sexual union intentionally. All those things are acting inappropriately. We're not exercising our reason or nature properly, right? So doing so fails to come to terms with our nature. So what happens when we go against the meaning of our sexuality? Of the 3 options, only the third will allow us to become mature and healthy as people. Only the third. Because it's the only one that goes in conformity with our nature. The first option, denial, never allows us to grow as people. If I deny my sexuality and repress it and stuff it down inside of me, that's heterosexual or SSA alike, I will explode. I will hate myself. I will become mad at God, my parents, the world, you name it. I will pick a victim, and I'll go after them. So that option never works. Okay, so option number 1 is out of the question. The second option, embracing a gay lifestyle, is what many people with SSA have attempted to do, mistakenly thinking that's going to allow them to become happy people. It's a way out. Okay, they do so because it seems like an escape from the denial, which they don't want, and that's correct, and because it allows them to act out on their sexual desires. It's pleasurable for a while, anyway. Okay, it's never really satisfying for long, but that's what they think. So, in order to best facilitate option 2, acting out in a gay lifestyle as a way to deal with their SSA, the gay lobby, and I'll just say it, has systematically attempted to construct a private and public set of perceptions that normalize gay behavior and a gay lifestyle, thinking that the more normal they form the perceptions, the more heterosexual they try and behave like, the easier they're going to have it. That's what's happened lately. So the push for same-sex marriage is rooted in this mistaken approach. They're trying to normalize something that's not. The push for same-sex couples to adopt kids is another attempt to normalize something that is not. The goal is to make the disordered lifestyle seem as normal as any other. Okay? So that's what's happening in our culture right now. We're trying to normalize something that is not because we think it's going to make us happy. But we're running from our nature, which is why it's not going to work. Okay? So now in part, frankly, and here I'm going to pick on you again, who can blame them? Because heterosexuals have mistreated and misunderstood people with SSA for centuries. They have been maligned, they have been abused, they've been made fun of, they've been beaten up and killed. That's horrendous. So it makes sense that they want to find a way out by trying to normalize something that isn't normal, because it seems like an appealing option based on how the rest of us have treated them. And heterosexuals have made an absolute mess of marriage and sexuality and child-rearing by embracing contraception, fornication, and divorce on a massive scale. Okay? So we have tried, heterosexuals, for decades now, since the sexual revolution, to normalize sexual behavior that is contrary to reason, even if not quite contrary to nature. So if we've normalized contraception and divorce and adultery, why can't they normalize same-sex behavior? It's all the same distorted ball of garbage. So I don't blame them on one level. They're reacting to what has been done to them and around them by all the rest of us people who are disordered in our behavior most of the time. Option 1 doesn't leave us fulfilled. Option 2 doesn't leave us fulfilled either. Books can be written on the wreckage of the sexual revolution for heterosexuals. Destruction of marriages, decline of the family. There's ample evidence of what happens when we live contrary to reason. Here's another one for you right now. We don't have enough young people to sustain our old people in this country. The economy is falling apart in this country and other ones because demographically we have contracepted ourselves out of a retirement plan. That is what has happened. So when you go against your nature, it hurts you in the end. So another example. So in the case of those with SSA who are openly gay, not only are they contrary to reason, but contrary to their nature on a radical level. If you want to act out on it, it's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt. So it's not surprising that any therapist or priest who's done work with actively gay people, those who've left the lifestyle, they call it leaving the lifestyle, will tell you how unhappy they are. They are unhappy. Okay? And I'm generalizing here because, not always perhaps, but some realize right away they're unhappy. For others, it takes years and years to realize what they're doing to themselves. Okay? But eventually, it does catch up. The Pew survey that I mentioned in the source sheet notes that 18% of lesbian, gay, bi, transsexual, self-identified adults say that they're very happy. 18%, which compares to 30% of the rest of the population. Almost half. Okay? And even though societal acceptance of openly gay lifestyles has grown, there has been no corresponding growth in happiness or satisfaction in the gay community. It's not materializing. Every right we've given, every marriage we've legalized, all the stuff we've tried, they're not increasing in happiness. The numbers show us that. Okay? Their rates of domestic abuse, substance abuse, and suicide are far higher than the rest of the population. Same for pornographic use, masturbation, voyeurism, very, very high in the gay community, exceedingly high. Their domestic partnerships are highly unstable, more so for men than the women. Okay, the women tend to stabilize a little bit more because for them it's less about sexual contact, it's more about relationships. For men, it's very much about rapid sexual partners. So to have a stable male same-sex marriage is much, much harder than it is a female one. Neither one of them lasts all that long, generally. Many of the male domestic partnerships continue only on the understanding mutually that monogamy is not a requirement. They have an open marriage. Otherwise, they don't stay together. They just kind of accept it as a condition of being a couple. Okay? And the gay lifestyle is full of deviant and disturbing behavior that should not be described or witnessed in a polite conversation ever. Those are the results of people living against their nature. That's what happens. Okay? So this is not me picking on anybody, I'm just telling you what it is. So note, all that is a choice to act on an inclination. And therefore we are in the realm of what is sinful and what is not. Okay? So the causes of SSA are on one level kind of irrelevant because the result is still the same. You can't act out on it and expect to be fulfilled or joyful as a person because you cannot sniff paint and live. Can't do it. Okay? So option 3 is the only real human life-giving option here. And the thing about it is, it's the hardest one. It's the hardest one. So repeat, option 3 goes like this. It's on your sheet. Coming to terms with the truth of it, SSA, by accepting the challenge of managing it within the limits of what our nature allows, living chastely, and directing our passions and energies outward for the good of others and not for selfish gain. So to move from option 1 or 2 into option 3 requires a few things, and this is really, really crucial, okay? So here's the question of how to respond to this. This is the response, all right? 1, it requires that we realize the truth about our nature. Without that, we're not going to make it. If I'm denying my nature, if I'm denying the ends of my sexuality, I will keep eating chocolate-covered roofing nails and expect to be happy. So I must realize the truth about my nature. The first third of this talk, you got to buy it. If you don't, you're sunk. Okay? So to get out of option 1, denial, option 2, actively gay, we must recognize it for what it is. It is not natural. All right? Which again says nothing about their dignity as persons. They are sons and daughters of the Most High. Okay? 2, human experience and self-honesty that pays attention to feelings of emptiness rather than always trying to drown them in mere passions will get us to the truth. If we are paying attention to how we are really feeling, we will realize our actions are eating a hole in our hearts. If you talk to these people, they eventually figured it out. Many of them do. The ones who come into the church again and begin to recover, they just finally woke up and said, I am not happy. It does become obvious after a while. My stomach will hurt with nails inside of it. I will figure it out. Okay? Here is where the Catholic Church and the Scriptures can assist us in case we don't immediately grasp the truth of our nature when it comes to sexuality. Okay? Our passions are so murky. We call so many things love that are not, that we get confused very easily on sexuality. So to help us in our confusion, there is the church. And there is the Scriptures. Now, our nature is obvious if we're paying attention, but if we're not, which we're usually not, then we look at the Catechism. And amazingly enough, it all agrees. Funny how that works, right? The Scriptures consistently condemn same-sex acts as contrary to God's nature and plan. Not homosexuality, because, like I said, that's an orientation, that's a new term, but the acts have always been the problem. Same thing with heterosexual acts that are out of sync. Scriptures condemn those too. Okay, there's commandments. Adopting a set of habits and behaviors and healthy friendships that encourage chastity is essential. That's true for married people. That's true for people with SSA, true for single people. We have to have good friendships that encourage chastity and encourage us to live the truth of our nature. Can't do it alone. Living in accord with the limits of our nature requires a supportive family and a community that encourage a person with SSA to maintain a chaste lifestyle. It's hard work. It's very, very hard for these people. It's very hard. They need a community to help them. An active prayer life is essential. Jesus Christ as a friend is essential. The church is essential. Frequent confession, devotion to the Blessed Mother, Eucharistic adoration, reception of communion as often as possible. All those things are required to maintain a chaste life for these people. Okay, they don't have those things, they're not going to make it. Okay, and this is the most important one I think, a strong spirituality of the cross that learns to see sufferings and burdens of life as a source of grace rather than a punishment. Many of these people are mad at God because they think he's done this to them, and it's unfair and it's a burden. So until we can learn to transform our thinking and accept our burdens as a source of grace, we're not going to make it to option 3. We're going to be stuck in 1 or stuck in 2 and will not be joyful or happy as people. Okay? So to summarize, it's nearly impossible to successfully deal with SSA in a healthy way that conforms to our nature without appealing to faith. We need Christ. And here's where it's a religious argument. Not about the truth of it, because we can get that by biology. But dealing with it needs faith. It needs faith. Sadly, survey results show that most people with SSA, especially who are actively gay, reject religion. They reject it. So they have cut off the main source of help that they've got. And so they sit there spiraling into nothingness, becoming very unhappy, many of them, okay? Or at least deluding themselves that they are happy, okay? It's a really very unfortunate cycle that we're living in right now. So how do we respond to SSA? The cultural options parallel the three other ones, right? Option one is a culture. Denial doesn't work. Denying it or suppressing it out of the cultural mainstream is not an option. We tried that. And the gay lobby has exploded because we tried to suppress it as a culture. Doesn't work. Option two, normalizing the gay lifestyle, doesn't work either. Although this is what the culture is trying to do right now. We're passing through this historical phase right now of trying to make it normal. I don't know how long it's going to last, but that's the phase that we're in right now. So we don't do anybody favors by trying to convince ourselves or them that disordered behavior is anything other than disordered. We just say what it is. A loving person tells someone else the truth, as hard as it happens to be. But here's the catch, and here's where we really fail, frankly. We tell them the truth only if we first told ourselves the truth about our own disordered behavior. Everyone needs conversion, not just the gays. We all need conversion, especially when it comes to sexuality. So we can't go after helping them if we're not going to face the truth about ourselves. That is paramount. They call us hypocrites because we are. We are. Okay? We can't call something love that's not love. It's lust. We can't give legal recognition to a social arrangement that is a direct attack on the family. It only will ruin society even faster. Though option two as a culture is not an option. We're trying it right now. It will fail. It will fail. Don't know how long it'll take, but it will fail. So the loving response, back to option three, we have to assure the people with SSA that they are God's children and that they are loved. And precisely because that's true, they cannot engage in a gay lifestyle. We cannot stand by and watch someone else engage in behavior that destroys them. That is not what good people do for each other. So we try and help them see their condition as something analogous to like alcoholism or as something that can be managed or treated a little bit because it involves choices rather than actively embrace as normal or healthy, because it's not. We try and help them see that they're bigger than their sexuality. This is really important. It's a poor choice to make the defining element of their identity their sexual orientation. We are so much bigger than that. But for them, it becomes their defining category because they hang on to it because they think it's going to make them normal, but it's not. So we tell these people, look, you are bigger than your same-sex attraction. It is not this looming thing that you think it is, so that the lobby has made out to be, that your support groups have made out to be. It's not the point. Okay, so they're mistaken on that, unfortunately. Parents have to have enough humility to recognize that some of the sources of their children's SSA may be a disordered family history, which means the child's going to have to seek help and answers someplace else, usually not from their parents, which is really, really hard for parents. It's like the worst thing to try and deal with this, okay? And I'm not saying that if your kid grows up and thinks that they have SSA, that you're a bad parent or that's your fault. No. 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 There is no manual for parenting. There's no handbook for parenting, okay? We all try our best, do we not? And things in life happen. Okay, we don't know why people turn out like they do exactly. We can speculate, but in the end, I don't know. But I will say to you, there's a chance that you will not be the first person parents that they're going to come to for help because somehow in their mind, whether you intended it or not, you're part of the situation that brought them to this point. So just know that, okay? Encourage them to live and be active in the church of sacramental life, provided they are seeking to live as best they can in accord with their nature. If they're going to try chastity, which they must do, then they need to be in the church. We need them in our family here. We need to support them in the church. If they're trying to live out a chaste life, we must, or we'll lose them. Okay? Parish support groups, and there are some nearby us, not in West Bend but close by, that label themselves as LGBT communities are to be avoided. They're to be avoided because they do not embrace the truth of the human nature and have instead fallen in the trap of normalization the culture is going through. So unfortunately, Catholic parishes have bought into the confusion about the topic. And that's to be thought about very carefully as we direct people to support groups. If they say LGBT, they are not to be, they're not helpful because they're not honest about our nature. So conclusions. Conclusions. All this depends upon the right understanding of our sexual nature as men and women. Most people don't get this, which is why the argument's already lost. I lost it an hour and a half ago. It's true. However, The truth of it is clear in our human experience if we are paying attention. And the emotional wreckage of our contemporary culture is proof enough that we are missing something. We are not paying attention. We are not supposed to live like we are. This is a disaster. It's a disaster because we are not living according to our nature. Okay? The Catholic Church, like it or not, offers the only clear and accurate teaching on the topic, along with all the graces necessary to live a life of virtue. So we have the truth of it, and we have the means to help. So we are it. And we're being rejected at every turn. However, the church is made up of sinful people with hard hearts, like my heart is hard, who must grow in our understanding of the keen suffering of our brothers and sisters with SSA. If we don't have a keen sense of their suffering, we're not going to help them either. Okay? And understanding does not mean accepting a gay lifestyle. On the contrary. That's not understanding. People with SSA will continue to be victims even if they're given every legal and cultural protection possible. They first must come to terms with who they are and what they must do to live a chaste lifestyle, or they will always be victims. Okay, no matter what you legalize, if they're acting out on it, they will be victims. Another conclusion, God does not hate gay people. God does not. The church does not hate gay people. People with SSA are broken people, like all of us happen to be. It makes no logical sense to label a sickness as something healthy, thinking that doing so is going to make it any better. It's not. Rather, we would recognize it as a disorder and let the suffering of it move all of us to walk with them in a companionship of love, changing our own wayward sexual behavior in the process. We have to change too, or we're hypocrites. All of us. The argument about same-sex attraction is not primarily a religious one. It's rooted in natural law and is therefore accessible to any person of reason. If you're paying attention, you can figure it out. Faith is actually the only tool out there that can help people with SSA move from option 1 to option 2 to option 3, which is the only life-giving one out there. And lastly, our only real orientation is to Christ. Only He can heal our wounds, especially those of our past, as a culture and as persons. He's it. But He can't help us if we don't come to terms with who we are as people. Okay? The last thing I'll end with, very briefly, is my experience at the conference last July that I attended. I had the great fortune to go to the Courage Conference at Mundelein, Illinois. They have one at Mundelein every other year. The off years it moves someplace else in the country. I'd never been to a Courage Conference before. My experience with them was peripheral and limited. It was, I think, a Thursday night. There was Sunday morning. It was in July, and I went not knowing what I was walking into, and I went with a lot of apprehension about who I was going to meet because I knew that I'd be on the grounds of Mundelein Seminary with about 300 people who were homosexuals, and I wasn't really comfortable walking into that situation exactly. But I got there and began to realize that they are good people who are God's sons and daughters and who have a great fight on their hands and who really are people of courage. And as the weekend wore on, we spent time together, I came to realize just how profoundly beautiful these people really are. They are trying to live what the gospel teaches them they need to because their nature demands it. Some of them have families and wives who struggle with them through these things. They have kids, some of them. Many of them do not. They need the sacraments. They love the Eucharist. They love Mary. They love the church, and many of them hated it for a while. We heard their testimonies. They would talk about how they spent years in an actively gay lifestyle, doing all kinds of things, and how they hated God and hated the church. But as time passed, God chips away at us. He works on us. And eventually they figured it out, and now they would never leave because they have found the truth. And my heart was broken for these people who deal with so much. And the worst part about it is, not only are they not accepted by the heterosexual community, but they are hated by the gay community. I mean, hated is the word. And so I felt for them. And I thought to myself, I really need to do something to help them. I don't know what that is exactly. So I listened to the conferences and went to the talks, and my eyes were opened about things I didn't understand. A lot of what I shared with you tonight I picked up when I was there, things I've read since then. I'm still praying about what that means for me. Okay? So I want you to understand that there are groups out there that exist to help people with SSA that are authentic and that are good. There's no Courage chapter yet in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. There's one in Green Bay. I think they're starting one in Madison. There are two in Chicago. They're hard to find, okay? However, they're out there, and they require a priest and a bishop that is supportive and a congregation that is supportive as well. And we're very discreet about how it is that we help each other in that community. Okay? Last names were not used at this conference. It's all by first name. Okay? And so, and for them it's like a retreat. Every year they look forward to this because they get back together again with their friends who authentically help them. And it was wonderful to behold. So I came away with a lot of hope. I mean, a lot of sadness about, gosh, are we messed up as a culture about this? But hope that there are pockets of sanity out there if only we know where to look. Okay? So I want you to pray about that and about what it means to support these people in a way that is authentic. So that is a lot. That's a lot for all of you to digest. Like I said, I'm sure you walk away mad at me about something. So it is. On the back table you will find a stack of my notes, 150 of them, so take them if you want to. It's on the website already. You may share it if you wish. I have no problem getting hate mail. And the video will be up soon, in God's time. It will be up. And so that is the end of my formal presentation. If you'd like to take, it is 8:35, so if you need to leave, you can, but I will take about 15 minutes of questions if you want to stay for a little bit. Last thing, savor this because I really think that soon what I told you would be illegal to say. I'm really serious, and it'll be a sad day when it happens. So, but it's really important to pray about why that is and how unfortunate that is, that we're now being labeled and treated in the way that we once treated the people who are most upset with us. So that is sad to me. In Canada, we're almost at the point where I couldn't do this tonight without going to jail. That's really very unfortunate. But that's where we're at. Okay? Questions? If any. And if not, that's okay. I know you want to go home, go to bed. Yes?
In the past, I always wondered about the arguments like not allowing gays in the military or in certain job situations. And I was always pulled into feeling like that was wrong, but it seems like our religion supported doing it, separating them. So how should we best approach that?
Question is about should we or should we not allow gays into the military? So we're talking about the cultural response to this question. I'm not sure I will say this about it. And again, I'm not speaking as a person who has done enough work with this to be able to give you a great answer, okay? So take it with a grain of salt if you want to. But I will say that on one level, it's an irrelevant question because they're persons like everybody else happens to be, right? And so if they're capable and active and able to serve our country with love in their hearts out of the pursuit of freedom and ideals that the military is supposed to stand for, that's wonderful. What a person with SSA should ask him or herself, though, is this. Is it healthy for me to put myself in a situation where I'm in close quarters with a bunch of other men where I'll be tempted to act out in ways that I probably should not because of the attraction that I deal with? That's a question only they can answer. Okay? Frankly, any heterosexual military should ask themselves how they handle themselves, in the military. Same thing, right? So that might be how I would answer the question. Yep.
Thank you very much, Father. Just two things. You brought everything together in a bibliography is great, and everyone should read that. Hannah Arthur is excellent.
Yeah.
I think that the only question I ask is when, as an archdiocese, first time I've heard contraception from a priest is you. So
Yeah.
the question I have is, on one bibliography you should put in there some amount of detail.
Mm.
You said everything that's happened today is because that was neglected by our teaching. So we theology of grace has gone the way, because the only way any of us can handle our own problems is through Jesus Christ. Paul listed my bad tongue along with
Yeah, right.
everything else. So, I mean, I think we need those
Well,
back.
so he mentioned, if you couldn't hear him, the fact that Humanae Vitae, which is a 1968 papal letter on the immorality of contraception, is often ignored in Catholic teaching. It has been for a long time, and that this is, as he would put it, part of what has brought us to today. I agree to a point, and that should be a required reading for everybody, right? I agree with that too. The thing of it is that what has brought us to this point is human frailty in general, okay? And if I could put it this way, the reason why people pursue contraception in the first place, or abortion in the first place, is because for all of fallen human history, we've never wanted to do things the hard way. Okay, so it's not new in 1968. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. It goes all the way back then. Men and women have always mistreated each other because it's easier than living properly. Okay, men especially, but women too, have always wanted, sex without babies because babies are really inconvenient. They get in the way of everything. But they're supposed to, right? That's the point. Okay, they make us come out of ourselves. So the answer isn't so much, you're right, I should be teaching on Humanae Vitae, and so should the bishops, and the priests are cowards. I agree with you, but the fact of the matter is that the problem is as age-old as sin itself. We want to do everything the easy way. Practicing natural family planning is a lot of work. It's hard. Ask married couples to do it. It is tough. But it's the path of grace. And as you said, the only answer to every human question in life, not just SSA, not just contraception, is Jesus. That's why he came. Okay? So I don't want to point fingers at whoever caused all this, because it goes back to the fact that we have all created a situation where we don't want to do things the hard way. We avoid the cross at every turn. Contraception is just avoiding the cross. It's as simple as that. Same thing with a gay lifestyle, same thing with adultery, same thing with bombing our neighbors without talking to them first. It's all avoiding the cross, right? And he did it for us because, one, we couldn't handle it on our own, and two, he wants us to walk it with him. That's the only path of life that's possible. And the people at Courage at that conference, they understand it because they live it very, very keenly. Other questions? Yep.
A gay couple tells you they want to live together chastely. What's your answer to that?
He asked if a gay couple says to me they want to live together chastely as brother and sister. Actually, Father Harvey talks about this in his books. And when he founded Courage, he had a real sense of what it means for these people to try and wrestle with this attraction in their hearts. And what he would say is that it's not a good idea because it is just too tempting. We can delude ourselves very easily into thinking that those kind of particular friendships with a person to whom we are attracted, living in such close quarters all the time, is going to be just fine. The fact is it's very, very difficult. So I think that would take a real careful process of discernment, a lot of honesty about what can I handle and what can't I handle. He would say that people with SSA need friendships within their own community, but not exclusive ones. You kind of have to be friends almost as a group and do things as a group, because otherwise it gets really easy to fall into situations that are really hard to get out of. Okay, Courage as an organization is built around certain pillars. It's very much like a 12-step program. They borrowed a lot from AA because you're trying to win mastery over a particular passion that's hard to get a hold of for you as a person. But friendships are a crucial pillar, but friendships that are appropriate with boundaries. So that's what he would probably have to say about it. Watch your sources of temptation because they get all of us in different ways. We have to know ourselves. So that might be, I think, part of the answer. Yep.
You've given us a lot of information tonight, Father.
I know, I'm sorry.
I think for the most part you tried to be very objective. I do question the validity of your third reference.
Which one?
The references were all to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Okay.
And I read from the Catholic Perspective for Education, Lifelong Learning, USCC 1990. Sexuality is a fundamental dimension of every human being. It is reflected physiologically, psychologically, and relationally in a person's gender identity orientation, and behavior. For some people, this means a discovery that one is homosexual, i.e. that one's sexual inclinations are orientated predominantly towards persons of the same sex.
Right.
If they discover this, then it was there. We all are children of God.
Yep.
We all are made in the image of Jesus. Corinthians, be a man, woman, Jew,
Yep.
Gentile.
Yep.
We're all one in Christ Jesus. Harvey is editorializing in this book. And you attended the Courage Conference just recently. And there are some chapters that still may embrace it. Courage had two thrusts. One, they viewed SSA as a mental disorder and resorted to reparative therapy, shock treatments. They screwed more people up, caused more suicides. Their second thrust now is helping them chase lives. That's good. But I read one other thing here, and this was from, we don't have time. When you refer to the gay lifestyle, that's one thing that irritates people. How do you define that? But regarding the question here, this was Cardinal Bishop Hume on church teaching concerning homosexual people, 1995. It is a mistake to say or think or presume that if two persons of the same or different sexes enjoy a deep and lasting relationship, then they must be sexually involved. I think there's a big hang-up that we think that people are sexually involved. We live in a retirement complex, and there are numerous elderly men and women living together because of economic reasons. I'm not going to prejudge and say that they're sexually involved, so I think you can find, and I've heard examples, of people with the same-sex attractions that have a loving companionship relationship without sex. Also, when Harvey referred to the suffering, he simplifies that. But I know several gay priests that have come to terms with their sexuality, have lived celibate lives. The only suffering they have is discrimination from the hierarchy. They have no problem with their peers or the people they minister to. So some of the suffering comes from higher up.
No, I agree. Yeah. Actually, to my ear, none of what you said invalidates anything that I said. The truth of our nature is the same. We can't act on our desires. If people with SSA have prayerfully, carefully discerned that they can exist in a friendship with another person of the same sex and not engage in actions that are immoral or unnatural, then that's a very good thing. It's difficult for most of them to do. Okay? So it is not what rules it out. But the truth of what I said about what our nature does and doesn't allow really is not changed by what you had to say. I will say, when your statements about courage, that, like I said before in the beginning, I don't speak for them as an organization, and I do not pretend to. I did go to a conference, that is true. But they have asked that nobody speak in their name without first getting their permission, because the legalities involved right now in the work that they are engaged in. So I will not answer your question directly because of that. I will not speak to it. I will leave it at that. But thank you for the points that you raised. They are important considerations in the whole complicated conversation. There are always nuances, it is true.
How do you get somebody to go back to God who's doing mad at God, and if nothing is going to change, how do you encourage them when every day is like they're mad at God?
Yeah, so the question she asked is, how do you get a person to return to God when they're so mad? You know, God works on our hearts. So he has a way of pursuing us and chasing us and bringing us to himself. And if we're paying attention and watching the sorrows of our hearts, in those he finds us. So the answer to your question is it's his work. He does the work. All right. So I think that is it for Q&A time. Thank you, everybody, for all that you are and do, and I appreciate you being here, and have a good rest of your night.